Lok Sabha has been adjourned and the Parliament is set to meet on 1st of February again. My colleague Mark Lynn continues to be with us. Mark, we were looking at different aspects of the economy. One particular observation that came up from one of the speakers was how Indian economy is at a uniquely sweet spot. There is a low inflation and high growth potential. In such a context, what are the expectations that we can have from the budget?
Well, that definitely gives the government plenty of room to go further on its spending side, and also not to be too concerned about the fiscal deficit, because the fiscal deficit is what leads to inflation. When the larger fiscal deficit means that it is cause for more money that is in the economy, and as a result of that, there is inflation. But when inflation is low, it implies that production has increased and demand is adequate. So it is a balance. Otherwise, if there is much more demand than supply, then also that leads to a demand pull inflation. The other form of inflation is when there's too much money in the economy. People have too much money and that's chasing too few goods. As a result of that, prices will go up. So it would give the finance minister plenty of room to increase spending, especially in capital expenditure, which has been required to spur the economy. As we saw, this was a recommendation in one of the earlier economic surveys, and the government took it very seriously. It has increased capital expenditure extensively over the last few budgets. In fact, it was about 11.1 lakh crore rupees in the last budget. And this is expenditure that goes into creating of infrastructure.
Right, Mark.
Infrastructure needs to be maintained.
Mark, I'll interrupt you just for a moment. Jobs. There's some important inputs coming in from the economic survey that has just been tabled by the finance minister. That's the news that we're breaking at this hour. The government's economic survey pegs the financial year 27 GDP growth in between 6.8 to 7.2%. That's the news just coming in. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tabled the economic survey 2025-26. The current fiscal annual report card of India's economic performance in the financial year. That's what the economic survey is supposed to be. India-EU FTA will strengthen India's manufacturing competitiveness. It forms an important mention in the economic survey. Export resilience and strategic capacity. India will need to prioritize domestic growth in uncertain global environment, also reflecting on the challenges outside. It requires greater emphasis on buffers and liquidity. These are some of the points in the economic survey that has just been tabled. Also, it talks about realizing potential of trade agreements require India to produce competitively. Government's economic survey pegs financial year 27 GDP growth at between 6.8 to 7.2%. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tabled the economic survey moments ago. Economic survey of 25-26 financial year, the annual report card for India's economic performance in the financial year that is on at the moment. India-EU FTA finds a mention. The survey says it will strengthen India's manufacturing competitiveness, export resilience and market. India needs to prioritize then the domestic growth in an uncertain global environment, is what the economic survey says. Returning to you, Mark, as we were talking about earlier, the recently concluded India-EU trade deal also finds a mention in the economic survey that it's an opportunity. Now, the challenge, the task lies with Indian manufacturers and producers to produce more in terms of quality and efficiency.
Yes, indeed, Shubhendu, I've been trying to read through the preface of the economic survey, and I'm struck by, one of the paragraphs that the Chief Economic Advisor mentions in his introductory note. He says that the paradox of 2025 is that India's strongest macroeconomic performance in decades has collided with a global system that no longer rewards macroeconomic success with currency stability, capital inflows, and strategic insulation. So India becomes a victim of geopolitics and a strategic power play gap. So this is the way he has presented the image of what is happening in the world. So India's economic performance is good, macroeconomic fundamentals are strong. But the environment for that, it looks like India may be, seen as a bright spot at the current time. But the environment around India leaves people to take some caution. I have to go through the rest to figure that out. But, part of that would be what the government has been doing to try and diversify markets to keep the economy looking for growth momentum. And that is precisely what, any economist would prescribe. If you need to find new markets, if one market is closing up because of certain policies, because it's becoming protectionist to a large extent, you look for greater access across the world. And that is happening because other countries too are looking for favorable trade deals. And India, being that power engine currently in terms of strong macroeconomic fundamentals, can attract that kind of investment and growth opportunities. So this is a potential opportunity for India. Of course, I need to go through the rest to find out more.
Yes, Mark, these are, of course, just initial details as they're coming in. Another point, if I can quote from the economic survey to you, this follows in line with what we're talking about. It says financial year 2027 will be a year of adjustment as the economy adapts to these changes, referring to the pressures from the international orders that are coming in, from the international global geopolitics and geoeconomics. So in that sense, it'll be interesting to watch in the manner in which Indian economy adapts to the newer challenges and opportunities.
So I'm sure he's given various scenarios on how India can adapt to those, to these uncertainties. That is precisely what the economic survey will prescribe. One has to go through the details. I'm sure it would be a very studied analysis and something that maybe economists would be able to comment on once they come into picture. But there would be many scenarios through which India can benefit. One is what we were talking about trying to find new trade through trade diversification. The other would be, of course, through building up on the own domestic front itself, increasing production, letting the economy grow from within. India has the advantage, unlike China. China did not absorb a lot of its own production. It had to deal with the global economy. India absorbs a lot of its own production. As you know, that India, has quite a strong consumption story, a very strong appetite, and now with several avenues of through which sales take place, especially online, that appetite continues to grow. And we can see that there is potential. Apart from that, where the government would be spending largely on various other sectors, including sectors such as the social sector, so that there could be distribution could take place a lot more. You know that the previous economic survey also did prescribe that the external sector and FDI needed to be looked at, and there needed to be reforms. Right. And we saw that several reforms did take place. They had liberalized norms in defense and manufacturing, and incentives also for the global supply chain. We also had PLI schemes and things like that. So a lot has already taken place. We need to see what more can be done.
Right. Mark, also the figure perhaps which is central to budget and economic survey, the economic growth projections. The survey pegs financial year 2027 GDP growth in between 6.8 to 7.2%. Could you put that into context? Is this in line with the projections that have been made on the basis of the data available?
So India will currently change its model of gathering data for the economy. The base year will change from 2011 to 2022-23 for statistics this year. So that may affect some of the figures that we are going to talk about. But generally, the momentum would imply that the economy has the potential to grow, and it has that momentum which continues to be given that speed, because or to accelerate, because the government has taken the favorable policies, and a lot of investment would continue to come in from there were some reports that were talking about how to get an investment into the markets, the stock markets, but actually investment needs to come into industry. And for that, we have seen that, Prime Minister himself, the Commerce Minister themselves, when they interact with top business leaders and they go out and have these discussions in business forums, this is where the investment potential is developed. Recently at Davos, for instance, we saw huge investments that were promised to come into India. This investment will then spur growth, because investment leads to job creation. It leads to greater production that would lead to furthering of markets and strengthening of the Indian economy. So we need to see where that investment comes in from, Shubhendu.
Right. Mark, also looking at some of the points that have been mentioned in the economic survey, once again, looks at the reform of the GST and the kind of positive impact it has had on the economy. In fact, many of the challenges of global uncertainty has been converted into opportunity through the GST reform. How do you see it?
Absolutely. The GST reforms that took place close to Diwali were significant in unleashing the potential of the market in India, the domestic capacity to absorb new products. And we saw record sales across sectors. And the Indian economy has been, held up in a sense because of strong domestic demand. And it is really the GST reforms that gave us that incentive. And earlier, of course, the government with its budget increasing the tax, the income tax limit. So as a result of that, people had more money to spend, and putting that money to good use in going out and actually participating in the economy. All of us, of course, have to, in our little way, contribute to the growth of the Indian economy by doing what we do. And that is important, whether we are using services, whether we are buying things, what we do in our jobs. All this is part of the general gross domestic product of the country. And the further, it continues to grow, as we see around us, also our own organizations continuing to grow and adapt. It is a sign that the Indian economy too is growing and adapting to change.
Right. Mark, also the economic survey, I'm looking at some of the details that is coming in. It mentions that India received credit rating upgrades from about 3 noted credit rating agencies in the financial year 2025. How do these ratings also create an atmosphere of optimism about an economy, and in that context, opportunities for India going forward?
So it puts a stamp of approval on India's sovereign ratings, the potential for the government to borrow, and the strength of that government to repay on those bonds. So basically, it implies that India is solvent. It continues to be, if you want to invest in government bonds in India, these are good instruments to be buying. So the government has this avenue to continue to raise money for infrastructure spending, for spending to bridge the fiscal deficit. All this can be raised because India has a stronger rating, a credit rating, which implies that India is its own credit worthiness has largely improved. It is moving into the investment grade, and investment grade means that please invest in India. That's basically what it says.
And Mark, just coming back to the growth rate for the current fiscal, India is now anticipating, the economic survey says, a full year real growth rate of over 7%. Help us understand, how does this figure fit in when we talk about India as the fastest growing large economy in the world? What does this figure of upwards of 7% mean for India in the global context?
So when a country which, or an economy which is over $4.2 trillion in GDP is growing at about 7%, we can see that, this momentum will take India faster to reaching the goal of being the third largest economy in the world, to overtake Germany. But we also need to understand that the first 2 countries of the world, the US and China, in terms of GDP, in nominal GDP, they continue to be large. But when we have to understand whether an economy can be assessed only in terms of the GDP, in terms of their dollar rate, rather than in terms of per capita, or I beg your pardon, in terms of purchasing power parity. So purchasing power parity is a more apt way of analyzing an economy as well. And the Indian economy actually, in terms of purchasing power parity, is already in the order of about $15 to $16 trillion, because the $4 trillion in terms of purchasing power parity, they would be able to purchase goods in the United States, for instance, which would be equivalent to about $15 trillion. So that is one way of looking at it. But the Chinese economy would then be the largest economy in the world as well, because their economy by purchasing power parity is larger than the US economy. But there is also another way of assessing through market capitalization. And through market capitalization, that is the overall value of the Indian economy in terms of the number of companies and their values on the stock market. We can see that India also has roughly about $4.2 trillion worth of market capitalization. But the US economy is about to the order of about $65 or $66 trillion on market capitalization, because some of their companies are valued in those terms. In fact, NVIDIA itself is valued at over $5 trillion. So we look at this way of understanding growth. One has to put it into a larger context as to what it can imply in terms of economic heft and potential. Definitely, India's growth rate of 7.7% is attractive in terms of somebody who wants to get in a return. The return on investment is what most investors would be looking for. They don't put in money for nothing. And India has also got loans in terms of development assistance from Japan, countries that are willing to give development assistance, where you get low terms of low interest rates. But the point is that countries and funds would invest in India because the returns are going to be above 7%. That's basically the understanding of what a good growth rate would mean.
Right, Mark. Also, we know that energized and empowered workforce are central to the positive growth of any economy. The economic survey also refers to the 4 labor codes that were notified. The rules are also expected to be in place in the next few months. What are the implications of these labor codes for the workforce, given the opportunities and challenges that the economy faces going forward?
So, we do understand that we have a large unorganized sector in our country, and the method of employment too has become, apart from seasonal, there are jobs which are only temporary in nature. All these tended not to be part of the larger labor environment, and because of this, there's more job protection now in the workplace for people, and even in the gig worker. I mean, it's up to the gig worker, after all, if you're working for a particular contract for a particular period of time, to see that during that period of time the contract is fulfilled in terms of its labor requirements. So there is much more clarity in terms of, from the worker's point of view as well as from the industry point of view, in terms of employment. Otherwise, there was a feeling that perhaps, when an industrialist would tend not to employ people if there was too much, in terms of there was the issue of not hire and fire, where there's too much protection for the laborer. But currently, of course, obviously that is an important aspect of labor codes. But the important part is also for the employer to be able to, understand that in case, after all, the economy is not doing too well, there is a possibility that jobs are not, permanent. And that is an environment that meets the standards globally.
Right, and Mark, we're looking at some more inputs coming in from the economic survey. It says India is relatively better off than most other countries due to its strong macroeconomic fundamentals. The domestic economy remains on a stable footing. The outlook, therefore, is one of the steady growth amid global uncertainty, requiring caution, not pessimism. Those are some of the highlights we are also showing on your screen. The economic growth rate. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tabled economic survey 25-26, the news that we're breaking at this hour. Domestic economy remains on a stable footing, according to the economic survey. Observing the developments in the global and domestic economy, the outlook is therefore is one of steady growth amid global uncertainty. We are flashing some of the highlights from the economic survey 2025-26. It says outlook requires caution but not pessimism. India-EU FTA recently concluded, it says, will strengthen India's manufacturing competitiveness and export resilience and capacity. Breaking updates coming in from the economic survey, it says India needs to prioritize domestic growth in an uncertain global environment. Also says it requires greater emphasis on buffers and liquidity. And my colleague Mark Lynn continues to be with us as we're flashing on the screen the updates from the economic survey. Mark, what do you make of the buffers and liquidity that the economic survey talks about in order to sort of sail through the challenges that persist, particularly in the global economic order?
Well, I haven't had the time to really go through, much of the details, but when one looks at the opportunities that India has to raise capital, they have never been brighter. And also the importance of the RBI as central bank has taken measures time and again to keep the the growth momentum, to keep liquidity available in the economy, so that both domestic demand and growth and inflation can be maintained. All these things are part of the domain of the money supply aspect of the economy, which is in the realm of the central bank. But of course, the expenditure of government is extremely important in setting the trend and setting the tone for investment in the economy. Right. And we see that if the government continues on its to maintain this high growth trajectory, which is essential. I mean, India.
Right, but I'll just interrupt you as more updates are coming in from the economic survey. We'll be putting that across to our audiences.
India needs to grow at least 8% average every year.
Right. Mark, we'll get back to you. Thank you very much for joining us with those inputs.